Well, it's kind of a long story, you know. It started already in the late 1970s when I was finishing up my PhD thesis. And within it, I had a rather rare type of experimental animal, namely some humans. So I got more interested in human biology and particularly human skin. And after having presented my PhD thesis, I moved into that area. And parallel to it, I saw in the Swedish newspapers, and particularly the union papers, a discussion regarding the new personal computer screens, the visual display units that were introduced in Sweden at that time. And more people, particularly women, were placed in offices in front of computer screens. And in parallel, they started to complain about skin irritation, skin rashes, heat sensations, pricking pain, and so on. And since we had in parallel then moved into the cutaneous biology field, I thought, well, maybe we could add some knowledge. And one evening, I listened to the Swedish radio, and that's interesting because I had never done that really before and not even after, so there was a pure chance, I would say, that the radio was on in the laboratory, and I listened to a woman that talked about these people that got these skin rashes in front of the new personal computer screens. And I contacted her and said, well, maybe we could help you, because she was asking for expertise in the field of neurobiology. And I said, well, let's do some experimentation together. And this was somewhere in the beginning of the 1980s. And after that, we formed various form of experimental groups, started to investigate this, and I coined the term screen dermatitis to denotate this kind of skin irritation or skin disease even. But unfortunately, I would say, we were able to present some very interesting data and regarding various alterations in the skin. And to make a long story short, it pointed very clearly to that this was an irradiation damage. Some form of electromagnetic field from the computer screens was irritating the skin and the cells and molecules within it. But that was not really popular because at the time the explanation model was that this had nothing to do with the computers. It was just in people's minds, in their imagination. One was talking about Pavlovian conditioning, like the dogs that Pavlov used, and people were talking about fears and scares, and also that this was some kind of mass media driven psychosis. And the explanatory models was sort of boiling down to that these were women having problems at the postmenopausal pause. And of course, for some time it held, kind of, you know, but then men started to appear having the same problems, and of course they don't have any postmenopausal alterations. So then instead people started to talk about that, no, these were people with low education. And then there came professors, lawyers, industry people, and so on. And then people say, no, we mean the opposite. It's people with a very high education that get these problems because they want to achieve so much. And since the computers are so slow and there's a lot of problems with the printers on, they get angry and frustrated, and therefore they get these skin problems, and so on, so on, so on. I mean, this kind of avoidance declarations was presented one after the other. But as I said, we did see these changes, and unfortunately we were able to publish them. And why I say unfortunately was that this drew attention to the data, and very soon we found ourselves in problems. We didn't get any funding. The funding situations grew tremendously difficult, and without the help from some of the Swedish unions like SIF, TCO, and so on, and also from other groups in Sweden, we would not have survived for a number of years. But eventually, somewhere in the mid-90s, all the funding stopped. And at that time, we had also moved from the computer screens into the field of mobile telephones. And we were actually the very first to present data that people could be sensitive to mobile telephones in double-blind exposure experiments. And we did one such, and we published a preliminary report coming from here at the Karolinska Institute and in Swedish. And the funny thing was, you see, that it didn't take even a week for this report to be present in my room. We didn't send it out or anything like that. But it didn't take more than a week until the first television companies started to phone, and the very first was BBC in the UK. And they said, "Oh, Jesus, what have you found? We want to make a television documentary about this, you know." And since then, this was the mid-1990s, radio companies, television companies, newspapers, magazines, journals, on constantly are coming here asking extremely good questions. We have a very good discussion. They air this, they discuss this and so on, they present it. But still, we cannot really do any further experimentations along these lines. And at the same time, in the general public, particularly parents, I would say, that's a big group that is coming more and more. They do ask very simple questions, which also boils down to saying that my child, my teenager and so on, is it good for them to be constantly irradiated with the kind of electromagnetic fields that in experiments in laboratories have yielded changes, alterations, damages and so on? And it doesn't feel very good for me as a scientist to often have to say that, sorry, we just don't know. It's a very good question. We would like to investigate this, but we cannot. It's like making this television program we do now. If you don't have money, you cannot travel to Stockholm, you cannot stay in Stockholm, you cannot buy a tape for your video camera and so on. You need money. That's basic, you know. And so that's a very effective way to sort of control the outcome of science, is just by not giving money.
That's I believe I have heard stories that that sound almost the same. You know, funding stopping and not getting anywhere and being blocked. And if we mention Roger Santini, the French professor who almost got thrown out of his own lab, and they took his keys, and I think he passed over last year because he had struggled all life.